Hi, welcome to Expert Talks at Mavericks. This is the Thought Leader interview series with leaders in the AI, analytics, and transformation space. My name is Mahadevann Iyerr, Mahaa for short. I'm your host for today. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mavericks, which is a managed marketplace for on-demand analytics and business transformation services. Our guest for today is Bharathram Ramakrishnan. He goes by Bharath. Bharath is the global head of data science and AI at Novartis. Prior to Novartis, he was the global head of data science and analytics at Dupont. Bharath has also held analytics leadership roles at Shell, at TCS and Mu Sigma, to name a few. He's a PhD in artificial intelligence. He's done his management and systems from NIT Trichy. He is also an electronics engineer. Bharath, thank you so much for making time to speak to us at Expert Talks at Mavericks. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Maha.
So Bharath, so you have, you worked. I think you started with Citibank, and then you were on the service provider side with Mu Sigma and TCS. Obviously, you would have worked across multiple industries, possibly there. And then you went to Shell, which is in the oil space. You went to Dupont, predominantly in the fertilizer space. Novartis now in the pharma space. So just wanted to understand. How did you go about, and in my own context, I used to believe, or I believe that, business context and domain expertise plays a crucial role in the way, analytics and AI teams can deliver. So just wanted to understand from your experience in terms of when you were working across this multiple industries and companies, how did you go about building your and your team's capabilities to deliver for the business?
Yeah, so good question, Maha. As I mentioned to you, right? So I think if you have the curiosity to understand the domain that you're working in, you must be able to do justice over a period of time, right? So I think there are still few industries like banking and financial services who are very specific about they need people who have close to 15 or 16 years leadership roles in that same domain, right? Which is fine according to them. But what I sincerely believe is it's very difficult for you to get anything innovative, or very difficult for you to try something which may not be the typical traditional way of approaching any analytics problem solving. If you are somebody who is stuck to one domain and comes only with that experience. If you speak to anybody who's from a banking scenario, right? So most of the time, banking is very restricted and the compliance-oriented domain. So which means that you might not have been exposed to a lot of things which other industries are exposed to. But if you take retail, right, it's one of the most advanced industry today, especially in the area of analytics, considering the velocity and the volume of data that it generates, right? There are many use cases which you can just directly cross-pollinate from retail to banking, but still, people, if you are somebody who has stuck to banking for a long time, you might not even be exposed to something that happens in the retail, right? So your curiosity to try something different goes for a toss. And also, I sincerely believe that if you are into a certain domain for a very long time, I think you become more of a subject matter expert and depth-oriented person rather than becoming somebody who can think beyond the traditional way of approaching things, right? It could be good for people who wants to establish themselves as a business leader in a banking industry, somebody who comes from the business side. But for analytics, which is more of a horizontal function to me, according to me, it's important for you to come with the cross-varied experience. And even today, if you see many of the big leaders that you see in the analytics space, they don't come with a single domain as such. And when you set up teams, you have to ensure that you get people who have the curiosity to learn on the new domain, and then I think you're set up for a success. Yeah.
Okay, great. So essentially what you're saying is, you build domain knowledge through curiosity, working, trying to solve for business problems, having empathy. That's what, if you have that innately, you're saying you can develop the domain knowledge. In fact, from what I hear from you, you're
Correct.
saying if you've worked across industries, the ability to apply learning from one industry across possibly other industries is something that is a strength for a analytics professional. Have I understood it right?
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So, now you're working with Novartis, a pharma company, and in the pharma industry, obviously, compliance, data privacy is extremely crucial, right? Equally, there are, everybody is actually pushing towards velocity, speed of delivery for impactful analytics, right? So how do you balance between both of these guys? So there are because of compliance and data privacy, there are areas which could be restrictive in the way you would like to look at data and make recommendations. Is there somewhere a trade-off there?
It is definitely a trade-off, especially if you work with a very compliance-regulated industry like pharma, right? It's not very easy for you to just take any data that is there and then do something that you want. If you work in a retail, most of the time you can just go and get any data that you want. Like most of the data falls under the business category, not under the restricted and the confidential category, right? But if you work with pharma, most of the data predominantly comes from the restricted and the confidential category. So for you to try something differently, it requires a lot of red tape to follow, approvals, and then finally for you to get into that use cases takes a lot of time. But I think these days many pharma companies are going pretty much at a bigger, faster pace than compared to what it was earlier. If you ask probably 10 years back, the same Novartis, right, might have had a lot of red tape within them, because of which it's very difficult for them to venture into a particular use case. But today, I think with the leadership becoming more dynamic and wanting to get something done very quickly, and also wants to show quick results, because today you cannot afford to tell that, I'm sitting with the drug trial for the next 20 years, because your competitors will move ahead of you. And if you have to move faster, you need to have very quick processes and systems within you. And if that's the case, I think the leadership teams have also enabled that some of the red tape is cut, and you will be able to move things in a much faster pace compared to what it was earlier. So it is a trade-off that you'll have to manage. Cases where if it becomes too difficult for you to get into the data, which is more restricted for you to work on, then you should probably look at trying to get a synthetic data or something of that sort and start working, at least so that as and when the required approvals come, you can use the actual data and go ahead with something. So it's like I would say a trade-off that you would have to do. Especially in a pharma industry, it's nothing like you get all the data and start modeling, right? For you to get approvals take a lot of time. So most of the time you start with a synthetic data which is generated if it happens to be a confidential part.
Got it. So essentially, you're saying there are processes that are working towards trying to see how the red tape can be removed, but equally
Correct.
how we as analytics professionals can, in some sense, speed up the processes using things like synthetic data, creating models, learning from it. And so when the real data and approvals are there, you can see if those learnings can be transferred and the models can be built quickly. I mean, these are some of the possible approaches.
Correct.
So, now I'm trying to, so I come predominantly from a retail background, and, one of the biggest areas for us in the retail e-commerce space has always been about consumer insights. How do you really understand that? And, more from a customer engagement, range building or product positioning perspective, etc. And you're constantly looking at saying, how can insights help improve customer lifetime value with us in a profitable manner? And hence, in some sense, help the business achieve profitable business growth, right? Obviously, there are other areas, but at the core of it, if any retail person were to be asked, what is your key thing? Everybody would start with the consumer, because that's the key thing, right? So given your experience of predominantly the process industry, the last three things you worked with, which is Shell and Dupont and Novartis, in that particular industry. So if we're the top 2-3 impactful functional areas which you have to pick for, let's say, business analytics, what would they be? What would the type of KPIs or metrics that you typically be focused on, and in which areas would they be?
It's one thing common which you can see across all these process industries is into the area of operations, right? So, for example, if you talk about predictive asset maintenance, right? It's a common topic which cuts across any industry that you work, and you spend about almost 15 to 20 million as fines if there happens to be a shutdown in your plant because of a catastrophe that has happened, right? That fine is something which you pay for your employees who have deceased, or is a fine that you pay for the environmental damage that you have done. It could be anything, but if it happens to be a catastrophe that happens out of non-maintenance, you end up paying a lot. So most of these process industries typically look at making their operations more efficient and more reliable, right? By introducing a lot of AI-related initiatives to figure out when a particular machine would fail, or when a particular machinery, or when a particular process would fail. It could be anything, right? In a pharma space, it may not be large equipments that is going to fail, but in a pharma space, it could be something which is very minimal. Like, for example, you have all these crates on which you do your drug development, etc., right? And they've been used for a pretty long time. And then you have very delicate microscopic substances which is used to look at the molecules and etc., right? So they're all very delicate in nature. They may not be as big as what you see a compressor or a rotator in a big industry, but essentially, if one of them fails, or one of them is actually giving you a wrong calibration, you're ending up with something which is wrong, right? So it's very important for you to ensure that your operations run smoothly by measuring these KPIs. So common use cases, I would say predictive asset maintenance is a very, very common use case that happens. And the other could be, this may not be very specific to pharma, but the other for specific process industries like oil and gas, chemicals, etc., is more on the optimization of product mix, right? So you have an input that is coming in, and then you have an output which is a combination of a lot of different molecules which are part of the input. So, for example, if we take crude, the crude gets refined to naphtha, and naphtha can be broken out into multiple chemicals, right? Like at least 5 or 6 of them, which are getting used for different purposes. So it's very important for you to figure out what is that right mix that I have to produce in my refinery, considering the quality of the crude that I'm getting in. These are sometimes tackled through a lot of AI-related initiatives in respect to refineries, but it's very common even in chemicals, right? The input and the output product mix. I think these are the two areas where it's very important to kind of focus on the manufacturing side. So I was telling, from a commercial perspective, all these three industries, the intent is the same, right? Here you're selling medicines, there you're selling your crude or chemicals. The shades of differences, it could be a B2B versus B2C. If you look at oil and gas and chemicals, most of the work happens on the B2B space. In pharmaceuticals, probably, I mean, you cannot call it as a B2B or B2C. It's like you sell it to your physicians most of the time, right? So, but the fundamental idea of how do you price it right, and what is that markup that you have to keep, what is that sensitivity that people have towards your price, etc. More or less, these things remain the same, right? So you typical things like your next best action models, or probably price elasticity models. These things are very common across these industries, right? So in that ways, you can always draw a parallel, especially on the commercial side.
Got it. So what, from what I understand, so when it comes to the operation side of it, the focus predominantly on, the reliability analytics part of it, the asset optimization, the optimization of how, you can get the maximum value in terms of what products goes in and the output that comes, right? So, and obviously the level of accuracy and prediction that you needs to be very high, because, there are focuses on predominantly, reliability, productivity, safety, etc. Whereas what I understand is on the distribution side of it, which is where you're trying to sell to either your wholesalers, distributors, end customers, etc. That is where your ability to almost act like, for lack of a better word, a B2C company in terms of experimentation, all that is reasonably high. Am I right in understanding that?
Correct.
Okay. In the retail industry, we've always, we have a decent understanding of what consumers are buying with us, the transaction, the type of engagement they do with us, and we are trying to see if we can overlay external data, like possibly things like Google foot traffic, anything about the economy, anything in terms of data from Kantar and other type of guys, to see if we can synthesize that information, see how existing customers of a company are reacting to changing market forces, and then tell the business what they could and could not do, and possibly experiment and see if we can enable them for growth type of stuff, right? In the industry that you work, which is predominantly the process industry, are there any parallels? Are there some external data points that are there, either in terms of studies or research, just to give a sense of how external data can also be used to learn a little more or optimize or maximize for productivity, reliability, etc.?
If you talk about external data, right, if you're looking at the commercial aspect of it, on your selling aspect of it, you might not be as robust as a retail industry, where even at typical SKU level, you will be able to identify what your competitors are selling at, right? It's not there, and it's not necessary also to be there, right? So because the industry is very different. Most of the time we happen in a B2B, and they are not, B2B segment is not that sensitive just to price, right? B2B is more sensitive to relationships than to the price. And so you do not have such a large ecosystem where you understand the same product is priced by your competitor this much and that much, etc. In pharma space, probably a little more relevant, because if I'm launching product A, which my competitor is also trying to launch, and if they price it even $10 lesser, it's gonna be a little difficult for me to get that value share with the customer. In a pharma space, probably it's little relevant, but I won't say it's completely relevant, because it's not like today I don't like this tablet, so I'll go to my competitor. It has to do a lot with how your body is acclimated to that. So it's the change that you will do to a different tablet is not as common as a change that you would do to a detergent, right? So it's very different. And same case with your process industries, right? The B2B relationships, it's more or less defined based on the kind of discounts that you're able to offer, the kind of relationship that you have with that particular customer, the longevity of the relationship that you have, etc. So most of them are subjective factors. But if you look at the reliability aspect of it, there is a lot of external data that you have, because if you look at some of the external benchmarking agents like your Solomon, etc., they do a full-fledged reporting in terms of maintenance and reliability by measuring how different refineries across the world fare in terms of number of days that have been shut down, which particular purchasing unit has been shut down, and what is the product mix that they produced, and what was the reason behind it. So major things like your availability, reliability, all these things are measured across different refineries across the world. And then they also give you a benchmark on where your particular refinery stands when you measure against the industry benchmark. So these are some of the external data that you can always use to kind of improve your reliability. These external data may not be as granular as you typically see in a retail industry, like what is the price of this product over the last 7 days by every hour. It won't be that granular. Probably is just the benchmark data which is given to you by different purchasing unit level only once in a year. But still, it's an external data that is used by you to improve your aspects of reliability and maintenance.
Got it. Now, in the pharma industry, where you're obviously selling to the world, right? There are obviously different regulations, compliance norms, which differ by geography, by country, etc. Right? So any insights into how do you, when you are doing a particular model? So obviously when you do a production thing, it may be relevant to that particular area of operation or that geography we are operating in. But if there are factories across multiple locations, or if there is a drug that eventually needs to be sold across geographies, so how do you combine all these things? Are there models that you build? How do you, from an analytics perspective, how do you look at it?
See, the models that we build, if you look at it, if you look at the advanced aspect of it, mostly there is into research and the development, right? How do I ensure that I find the right target molecule, or how do I ensure that I find the right molecules and accelerate that process of drug development? So in these cases, especially when it happens to be research, I'm not going into the development, which is more into clinical trials. If I'm just talking about the research, the majority of the advanced analytics happens in this space. Even today, the bigger aspects of your generative AI, everything happens in the research side, right? Because you have a number of documents that has been collected over the last 40, 50 years, and it's very easier to just use an OpenAI based GenAI tool to kind of go through those documents and create a summary or make it even more structured and use it. So in this space, you don't really have to worry about the geographical restrictions, because all that you're trying to find out is what is that next best target that I can find out, or what's that best molecular combination that can help me in terms of identify that target, right? So research wise, you do not have to worry much about it. But when it goes to clinical trials, yes, there is a lot of regulations, because how you're gonna recruit your patients for your clinical trial is very different across different geographies, right? And there are regulations like you cannot be recruiting the same patient for more than 2 times in the last 3 years or 4 years, etc. In places like Europe, in US, it might be a little more lenient, etc. So based on these regulations, the kind of recruitment models that you build to identify the right patients who can go through the trials, it's restricted a lot because of certain geography specific regulations, right? And when you go into operations, it's more or less the same. I mean, you're just working with the machinery data, so you really don't have to worry about whether this asset, the data is sensitive or non-sensitive, because at the end of the day, you're on machinery data. And when you go into commercial, yes, there is a lot of regulations, very similar to what you would see in a banking or a retail industry, right? Like you cannot contact a certain customer more than this many times in this span of 3 months or 4 months. But here, the only difference is you don't have customers, but you have physicians. You cannot go and contact the physicians for more than let's say 2 times in 3 months or 3 times in 4 months, etc. Right? There are certain regulations around that aspect of it.
Got it. So, so one of the things is you spoke briefly touched upon generative AI and NLP, right? And that's interesting, because I always used to think that, it's like predictive AI and generative AI actually feed off each other, right? In the retail world, where you're experimenting a lot, where, the cost of failure, if it is measured and responded to, is not very high, because you can experiment, try a new rate, try a new price. If the customer doesn't buy, you change it around. So your agility to do something, and also the business impact or the reputation impact of that can be fairly limited. Your ability to use generative AI for creating content, for creating communication, for trying out personalization is fairly high, right? Whereas in the process industry, I thought predictive AI becomes even more important, because the level of accuracy needs to be very high, right? But then you touched upon certain things about how do you understand research reports using NLP and all that. So can you throw some light on, given that generative AI is so current and contextual, we cannot ignore that part of it. So how is generative AI being used in the pharma and the process industry now?
Generative AI in pharma industry, majority of it is being used, I would say, in the research and the development area aspect of it, because you have huge amount of documents, and it's manually not possible to go through those documents every time and take a decision. So you use all these generative AI tools to create a summary out of those documents, or sometimes you help these scientists to go and query what they want based on the knowledge that is built using these documents on the background, right? So you create a vectorized database, and then you get your scientists to go and query, and then it's like a custom chatbot that is built, which is answering you based on the documents that have been stored on the back end and uses OpenAI models to give a summary to you. Right, so this is one of the very important aspects in pharma. I would say research and development, this is the most important area where you kind of query and then get a right answer, or you get of summarize and then use that summary as an input to some of your analytics in the higher part of the value chain. In commercial, you can do a lot of stuff like you can simulate how a physician meeting would go if there is a new product launch. You can probably feed in a document about your new product launch and then probably understand the kind of questions that a physician is going to ask you based on the new product launch, and so that you can prepare well before you go and meet the physician, right? So simulation is another aspect where you can actually look at it. And I think these are the three areas where generative AI is used predominantly, especially across pharma industries, not only with Novartis. If you look at any big pharma giant, research and development is one place where it's being used a lot. And some of it in commercial, like I was talking about simulation, etc. And also on the area of legal, you can use it a lot because you're a very regulated industry. You need to submit your reports on a regular basis. You need to submit your findings, etc. So for you to kind of manually write those reports is going to take a lot of time. And let's say there is a query that is coming up from the FDA. If you have to go through all those documents and go back with your report, it's going to take a lot of time, right? So in those cases, you can use generative AI to kind of have these documents on the background completely vectorized, so that you just go and query it and then the answer comes out, right? So these are some of the areas where typically Gen AI use cases are used in the pharma industry.
Great. So now let's talk of responsible AI, right? I mean, essentially a combination of ethical and explainability, if I loosely try and put it there, right? Ethical is very clearly understood because that's the nature of the industry itself, right? Now, from an explainable AI perspective, can you talk of examples? So, for example, the whole belief is obviously explainable AI is becoming increasingly important, but then there's a trade-off in terms of, in a typical AI black box model, you could have high levels of accuracy, but explainability could be an issue. And if you try and remove the parameters, explainability will be better, but the accuracy could be a challenge, right? I mean, so how do you solve for that in the industry? Now, explainable becomes in the retail and all that becomes a lot more important because there are consumers whom you're answering to. You have to also address the question of bias. There are from a consumer led, there could be legal issues in terms of why is there a bias type of thing. We need to be able to answer that, right? How does that apply in the process of the pharma industry, and how important it is, and how do you approach that and solve for it?
In the pharma industry, if you look at responsible AI and explainable AI, right? So explainable AI, I would say, is still very important because even though I use AI to come up with a target or a molecule, tomorrow let's say, goof upon something, right? By identifying a wrong molecule or wrong target, and my patients are dying in my clinical trials, I cannot go and tell, I use a generative AI model. I do not know what happened on the background. Your company will be sued and will be out of business very soon. So explainable AI still carries a very, very important aspect in the pharma industry. Where there is a trade-off is, for example, as I was telling you, going through multiple documents and then summarizing it and using it as one of the input to your models is one place where generative AI can help a lot, right? But generative AI alone cannot determine my solution. It is an augmented input that comes to my overall predictive model, and so your predictive model, let's say, has X plus Y plus Z as the inputs that coming to it. The Z can come from probably a generative AI model, which is just one of the parameters. The X and Y comes to your typical traditional structured way of looking at things. So when you try to put an explainability context to it, the Z component, which is coming from the Gen AI piece, is something which you will not be able to explain because you do not know what happened on the background. And it's your responsibility to ensure that the Z component is single-handedly not determining the outcome. right? It is just used indicatively. So that's how you make a trade-off, especially in a pharma industry, because it's very regulated. And if you look at the process industry, again, right? If I go to an oil and gas company and say, you know what, I'm building a predictive asset maintenance model for you, and on the background, I'm using a generative AI model, or I'm using some algorithm which is not very explainable, they will slap you and send you back, right? Because for them, if you are sending out an alarm telling that there is a probable shutdown that's going to happen in the next 1 hour because there is this particular equipment that is failing, they do not want to know it's failing. They want to know why it is failing, right? That is more important for them, so that it doesn't happen in the future. Every time you send out an alert, they cannot just go and shut down without knowing what is causing the reason, right? So for them, explainability is a much more important aspect of it. So even your models, like your deep learning models, which is more of a black box where you hardly have a clue of what is contributing to that particular outcome, right? They don't sell in oil and gas because the refinery experts will not buy it. They will say, you need to tell me what is causing this. So you most of the time end up with a typical machine learning model, which is more explainable in nature, be it a decision tree, or be it a logistic regression, or be it SVM, but something which is more explainable in terms of factors, right? So that is how it works. But anything, I would put it very simply, anything that involves a lot of unstructured data, be it videos or text, which is very humanly difficult for you to comprehend, generative AI can come and help that piece. But you cannot get that into the structured aspect of it, because if you get into the structured aspect of it, you lose the complete explainability. And especially with the way that AI is growing, there will be a lot of regulation that is coming into play in terms of explaining what is happening on the background. So that's how I look at it. Yeah.
Got it. So what you're saying is, given the importance of safety, reliability, and the extreme cost of production per unit of time and all that, explainability is extremely key. I mean, the consumer side of the business may not be there, but given the safety considerations and all that, and the cost of running operations, explainability is actually far more key than experimenting on the outside, if I understand it right.
Correct.
So now, the other part of it, which is essentially about the future of work, right? I mean, the world is moving with ChatGPT and all the models that are coming in, and with Gemini, and with the low-code, no-code type of platforms, right? Business context and ability to really write good prompts, have the context, and be able to see if it practically makes sense, is becoming an increasingly important skills. And moving away from what I call as code writing, right? So you go to a ChatGPT, it actually creates a Python code and gives it to you. As long as you know how to use it, you're reasonably good, right? So do you see this? And then there is one part of it, which is the need for really writing deep models, from first principles is almost going away, as long as you know why that particular, where what needs to be applied in terms of approach, right? So when would you use a SVM, when would you use a random forest, whatever, if you are clear about it, you would actually apply it. That doesn't necessarily need code writing skills or Python skills or whatever, right? That's one part of it. The other part of it is this whole thing of the movement towards what I call as people wanting to become more freelance, more contract, work from anywhere, work anytime type of stuff, right? So there are two things which are happening in some sense, call it future of work, or the work is actually moving in that direction, right? General ecosystem. So just as a analytics leader who's led analytics for more than 20 years now, 19, 20 years, how do you see the whole, analytics team or setup or structure in any company, be it an enterprise or a GCC? Do you see this undergoing a change in the years to come? Will it actually combine more of flexibility with accountability on certain sides? How will it move? What are your thoughts on that?
I think going forward, especially with the GCC kind of construct, everybody will move towards a model of where you are making something and you're buying something, right? In terms of the resources. Gone are the days where you will say, you know what, I need a 800 people team. I'm going to make all of them my associates, and then I'm going to recruit over the next 1 year and start the operations. Those days are gone, right? Especially with the current generation, you cannot expect to work in that model because everybody wants to do 100 things at any point in time. And it's very difficult for you to also kind of curtail a lot of moonlighting that happens today, right? I mean, a person who's working from home, he or she could literally do anything that he wants. Nobody has a control over it, right? So with that in place, I think you have to get adapted to the industry. You need to have, let's say, 30% of your team, which is in-house, which are predominantly leaders who are very good in leading teams, etc., through complexities. And then the remaining 60 to 70% you can manage through your external resources, right? I think this is the end state where everybody will go into at a point in time, because it also helps the companies in terms of, with today's thing, the technology is very fast evolving, right? Especially on the engineering side, it's extremely fast evolving. And you cannot afford to have somebody and keep them trained on a regular basis so that they are up the curve. So it's always easier if you go into a flexible model, and get into a contracting kind of mode and say, what, 50% of my workforce is contracted. So if I'm wanting a new skill, I can always go and get the skill very quickly. And if I find the skill to be redundant, I can go and give the skill back, right? So I think how it's going to pan out is minimum of 40-60 is the ratio that I'm looking at across GCCs, because with the remote working and the flexibility that the current generation is expecting, and the entrepreneurial ability that this current generation has, it's very difficult for you to work with the traditional model of having 100% as in-house associates. And you can already see it, right? I mean, I can talk about what we are currently doing, even in Novartis, right? There are certain places where we really do not want to build that skill set within, because we know for the fact it's very fast evolving. So we try to get that through outside. And the same case with, if you look at my earlier experience with Dupont, some of the non-core skills, we always try to get it through a different contractor or a vendor, right? And that's how we generally look at it. And even a large company like Shell, they will not get into something unless and otherwise it's a core capability of them, right? For example, let's say you want somebody to come and build your dashboards. It's not a core capability that the Shell wants to build, right? They generally think of outsourcing this to a particular contractor or a supplier who will do this work for them. And I think that's how it's going to be, especially with the expansion of GCCs in India. I would say 40-60 is a split that I would look at.
Got it. And so the 40, which is in-house, are predominantly people who are strategic thinkers, understand
Correct.
the business context and empathy,
Correct.
can program manage it, create the, prioritize the type of work that needs to be done, in some sense can shepherd the whole thing and get it delivered. And the 60 would predominantly be, for lack of a better word, evolving technical skills which you require and you plug into the context to deliver for that.
Correct.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. And I think that's the right way to do anyway, because technology is evolving fast and it's a bit of a challenge. And also, like you said, this whole thing of time to market is also getting extremely crucial given the way at which things are changing. So earlier you could set up a GCC in 1 year and start walking, and now the expectation is within third day of the GCC's birth you're expected to almost run alongside the business.
Correct. Because I remember gone are the days, right, when HSBC was setting up their first GCC in India back in 2005. They took about 1.5 to 2 years to just set up 25% of the team. And the business was completely okay with that. Now you go and tell, I will take another 1.5 years to set up the team, they'll ask you to leave. Right? You cannot afford to work with that model. And that's why I think this way of working is going to become much more common.
Got it. Okay, great. So I come to the last question of this interview, Bharath. So for any aspiring data scientist, business analyst or AI engineer who wants to come into this space, right? So as someone who's been there and reached leadership positions, what would be your top 3 advice be for them?
I think the top skill that you need to have is the curiosity to understand the domain and the business challenges that that particular industry has. That is very important, and your ability to talk a language which is understandable by the business, that is number 2. And number 3 is be more collaborative in terms of working. In analytics teams, you cannot afford to actually tell, what, I'm this and this is my boundary on which I will operate, and rest of it is your problem, right? If you keep on doing that, your team will eventually fail because you are measured by how collaboratively you work with different stakeholders. Analytics today is not like you're a self-sufficient team. You just have few data scientists with you, probably you have few data engineers or ML engineers with you, but without the help of the IT teams, they cannot go and succeed, right? You need an IT team to provision, you need an IT team to give you the infrastructure, and so it's a combination. Plus, you need the business team to tell you whether what you're doing is right. So the most important skill set for the analytics folks today is ability to collaborate across different teams, right? I think that's the third aspect which I would look at as the most important if you really want to grow up in your career.
Got it. So it's curiosity to understand more about the business, ability to talk the same language, or ensure that the narrative actually is something that is understood well and reciprocated by the business. And third is ability to really collaborate and work in a boundaryless fashion, because you need guys like IT and guys from the business to actually help you succeed, and eventually it's like a one team approach. So that's the mindset. So the 3 things that you have, then you have better chance of success. What's interesting is in all the 3, in spite of you being a very experienced AI leader, you didn't use the context of tech anywhere. So what you're saying is tech can come along the way, AI can come along the way, you will learn it along the way. If you have these 3, you have a better chance of success.
Correct. If you have these 3, I always assume that you are someone who's curious to learn. So you will obviously learn, right? I mean, just going and talking jargons to your top management might sell at a short term, right? But over a longer term, they are going to measure you on how useful you are to the business. So I think the technology aspect of it, if you're curious, it automatically comes with that. The rest of it is much more difficult to go through. Yeah.
Great. Bharath, thank you so much for making time to talk to us. It's been an interesting conversation. Learned a lot during the course of the last 60 minutes. Thanks once again, and look forward to staying in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Mahadevann. It was great talking to you, and looking forward.